This story begins with Hazen, who in his past life was the most powerful wizard alive, living for nearly 200 years. But then something tragic happened, and he lost someone very important to him. By the time he tried to get her back, it was already too late. That loss shattered him and drove him to gamble his entire soul and all his magical knowledge just to reincarnate. Then he woke up in this young body with the mind and power of a legendary mage. He still has no idea whether it was a god or some demon that gave him this second shot, but he woke up and just went with it. Several years later, the kingdom hosts a grand ceremony to honor the newly appointed imperial officers. But while noble brats get awarded minister seats, Hazen gets shipped off to the war front as a northern district border guard. But Hazen doesn't care. He takes the position with pride because he's always wanted real power and authority. A month later, Hazen finally arrives at his new post in the far north with his friend Riifa. The first thing Hazen does is introduce himself to the colonel in charge, Magno, who assigns him to the 8th platoon and instructs him to begin training immediately so he can get familiar with the other members. When Magno asks if he has any questions, Hazen says no, bows, and leaves. But while standing at the door, Hazen overhears Colonel Magno calling him awful names for being a commoner, and then says he'll die out there. Magno laughs with the other officers, saying nobody wants a commoner officer, especially one who's actually talented. Hazen hears every word, but rather than getting upset, he smiles and makes his way to the 8th platoon's training grounds. When he gets there, he sees the recruits dragging giant sandbags, soldiers gambling, and the overseer is literally so fat that the recruits are dragging him too. Hazen just stands there, confused and wondering if this is really military training and why their food supply depends on gambling. Suddenly, the gambling leads to a fight, and one scrawny dude gets flattened by the overseer. Seeing this, Hazen steps in to intervene, which pisses off the overseer, who immediately demands to know who the heck Hazen is. Hazen introduces himself as the new lieutenant in charge of the platoon and also introduces Riifa as his escort. When Hazen also demands to know who this overseer is, the bulky guy says he's Sergeant Chomo and then starts grumbling about how often the platoon's leaders get replaced. However, when Chomo notices how heavy Riifa's chest looks, the fool stops grumbling and starts flirting with her. But Hazen is already done with his nonsense, so he tells Riifa to beat the fat pig senseless. The Amazon baddie doesn't waste time burying Sergeant Chomo's head into the ground like a yam. With Chomo still lying on the ground unconscious, Hazen calmly announces new rules for training. From now on, they'll have to run 30 laps around the training field, and anyone who refuses will be buried alive. When Chomo finally wakes up, Hazen pulls out his magic wand to punish him some more, but the bulky idiot immediately takes off running in fear. Later that evening, the recruits collapse in exhaustion after finishing the 30 laps. But just then, Hazen notices one soldier named Baz trying to motivate the others. Realizing the guy is actually competent, Hazen walks up to him and puts him in charge of training. Hazen also changes the food distribution system, and he orders that from now on, everyone gets 2 servings of food and 3 glasses of wine, which makes all the recruits cheer like starving orphans. But Overseer Chomo sits in the corner grinding his teeth, furious that nobody fears him anymore. Sometime later that night, someone knocks on Hazen's room, and when Hazen asks who it is, the person introduces himself as Sergeant Dickett. When Hazen opens the door, he sees an extremely ugly dude with a messed up face who invites him to a welcome party they've prepared specially for him. Hazen immediately suspects it's some kind of setup, but he goes anyway because he wants to see what these degenerates are plotting. When he gets there, he sees Chubby Chomo, who offers him a cup of wine. But Hazen, being the sharp dude he is, already knows the pig laced the wine with poison and has also played out the whole crime scene in his head. When Chomo notices his hesitation, he tries to prove the wine isn't poisoned by drinking from a different bottle. To play along, Hazen then picks up the second cup and drinks, and the moment he does, Chomo's face lights up like a Christmas tree. In his mind, he's already imagining how Hazen will suffer 3 days and nights, rolling on the floor. But when Hazen keeps drinking without reacting, Chomo gets nervous. He starts wondering if Hazen figured out the plan or if Hazen is just insanely lucky. To his shock, Hazen smiles calmly and suggests they have a toast, since it wouldn't be fair for him to drink alone. Chomo freezes, and that's when his two brain cells finally click, and he realizes Hazen already knows about the assassination attempt. Chomo starts sweating like he's trapped in a sauna, but Hazen just smirks like a disappointed father and starts tutoring all of them on how they could have been better villains. He tells them the plan was sloppy, their behavior gave everything away, and they're simply too stupid to assassinate anyone. Realizing the plan has flopped, Chomo snaps. He immediately grabs the wine bottle and tries to smash Hazen's head, but Hazen instantly pulls out his magic wand and hits him with a spell known as Wind Cutter. Chomo drops to the floor like a log of wood while the rest stare in shock, wondering if he's actually dead. Baz starts panicking, and Dickett the creep is shaking like a Nokia phone on vibrate. When Baz finally pulls himself together, he drops to the ground, begging and swearing he had nothing to do with the poison, claiming it was all Chomo's idea. But Hazen shocks him by saying there was no poison at all. He explains that Sergeant Chomo is only being punished for striking a superior officer with a wine bottle. Hazen adds that a poisoning case would get them all punished for treason, and then asks once more if the wine was actually poisoned. When Baz desperately denies it, Hazen smiles and calmly tells him to have a drink too. Baz then picks up the glass of wine, but his hands tremble so badly that he drops the glass, shattering it on the floor. Hazen demands to know why he did that, and with zero emotion on his face, orders him to hurry up and drink. However, Baz is too shaken to move, and at that moment, Ugly Dickett tries to escape. But Hazen calmly pulls out his magic wand and fires a magic bullet straight into his skull. As Dickett drops to the floor, Hazen calmly turns back to the shaking Baz and explains how everything is gonna play out in case anyone asked. He tells him that both Chomo and Dickett attempted to assassinate a superior officer, which is a serious military violation, and as for him, he was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time. Hazen makes sure Baz understands that, then before leaving, casually assigns him to dispose of the bodies and inform their families. As Hazen walks out the door, he also lets Baz know the wine wasn't poisoned and that he switched it. Outside of the fortress, Hazen looks around the corrupt army base where everyone is compromised, from the higher-ups to the subordinates, and smiles. Now more than anything, he is determined to devour the rotten country that has lived in corruption for far too long and rise quickly while doing it. A week later, Hazen pays a visit to Colonel Magno, who admits he's surprised Hazen is still alive. Magno then introduces him to a dude with a stupid face named Lieutenant Mospa, who will supposedly be Hazen's direct superior officer. Before Hazen can even make an introduction, Mospa immediately starts accusing him of unaliving Sergeant Chomo and some other subordinates, but Hazen doesn't deny it. He calmly replies that he already filed a report about the whole thing. Thinking Hazen is being full of himself, Lieutenant Mospa loses it and shouts that Hazen can't be losing 2 men on his very first day on the job. But Hazen just stares at him like he's an annoying street preacher, and realizing Mospa is trying to set him up, Hazen flips the whole situation perfectly. He exposes that 10 officers from the 8th platoon also died under Mospa's watch in just 2 weeks, and absolutely nothing was done about it. Hazen tells him he's the real piece of trash for ignoring the murders on purpose. Hearing this, Mospa goes pale like someone unplugged his life support. When Mospa tries to argue and deny it, Hazen reminds him that if an external investigation is launched into Chomo's death, then he will also get dragged into it for his own actions. However, upon hearing about external investigations, the corrupt colonel panics and immediately asks Hazen to let the issue die. Suddenly, an officer rushes in shouting that there's an emergency. He announces that the Cuman tribe has appeared 3 kilometers south of the border, and there are about 100 of them. The Cuman tribe are mountain warriors who are enemies of the Empire and are famous for raiding villages at the foot of the mountains. Seeing this as a chance to prove his strength, Hazen immediately jumps on it and asks Magno if he can handle the situation. Mospa yells that Hazen needs his permission first, but Magno ignores the moron and gives Hazen approval to go protect the villages. Hazen then takes Baz and the rest of his men to the mountain border. As they spy from the bushes, they notice the Cuman tribe hasn't attacked the village yet, but they're armed and lining up. Through the binoculars, they also spot a wizard among them, a lanky dude wearing a crown and holding a strange staff. Hazen figures the wizard shouldn't be that strong, so he draws up a plan. He will duel the sorcerer while the platoon surrounds the rest of the Cuman warriors while they're distracted by the fight. But Baz thinks they should wait for reinforcements. When he brings it up, Hazen shuts it down, saying they can't wait and need to move fast. Hazen then steps out of the bushes, revealing himself to the enemies, and warns them that the territory they're standing on belongs to the Empire. But the Cuman wizard immediately gets hostile. He orders the warriors to step back and then, using his crystal staff, blasts Hazen with multiple shards of ice. But Hazen dodges the ice shards cleanly and uses his wind magic to bend each projectile off course. Realizing his first attack flopped harder than his clapped face, the Cuman wizard charges in, swinging his giant ice axe at Hazen. But Hazen slides under smoothly, and up close, he notices something weird about the wizard's staff. The gemstone is big, glowing, and way too high grade for some mountain warrior. That tells Hazen that if a savage like this guy is using such an expensive gem, then the Cuman tribe must have an entire stash of these high-grade gems. With that in mind, Hazen decides he needs those gems no matter what. So he unleashes Shadow Fang, a swirling black magic that looks like a tornado made of demon claws. The Cuman wizard tries blocking with his axe, but he gets sent flying like a kite while his gem axe shatters like cheap glass. Hazen then calmly walks up and picks up the broken pieces. The rest of the Cuman tribe sees their wizard die and starts screaming war cries as they charge to avenge him. But right then, the 8th platoon rolls in like backup dancers who just finally remembered their choreography. Baz fights like his life depends on it, while Riifa claps enemies left and right like she's doing morning stretches. Hazen, on the other hand, watches his squad actually fighting properly for once and smiles like a proud, evil teacher. After the intense battle, the 8th platoon manages to capture several Cuman warriors. Once they're rounded up, Baz tells Hazen that some Cuman escaped, but they're too injured to attack any village now. When Baz asks if they should finish off the captives, Hazen refuses and orders them to treat the prisoners with respect, as he plans to use them in negotiations. Hazen then asks if anyone among the prisoners can act as an interpreter, but Baz tells him it won't be easy since both sides hate each other. Suddenly, from the bushes, a tiny Cuman girl pops out like a lost cat. From the bushes, she overhears the soldiers complaining about how annoying the Cuman language sounds and how noisy their captives are. When one of the soldiers suggests hitting the prisoners to shut them up, the little Cuman girl gets terrified. She immediately rushes out of the bush and tries to untie her fellow Cumans. But a soldier grabs her by the hand, and in the next second more soldiers swarm her and start grilling her with questions, asking where she came from. Hazen notices the commotion, and as he approaches, everyone goes silent because the boss just walked in. He asks why there's so much noise, and the flustered soldier explains the situation. When Hazen crouches down to look at the girl up close, he realizes she doesn't really look like she's from the Cuman tribe. When he asks if she understands the Cuman language, the little girl says she does, at least a little. Hearing this, Hazen's brain immediately switches into strategist mode, and he figures having her on his side might be useful. He introduces himself, and when he asks for her name, the girl nervously stammers that her name is Lynn. Hazen smiles like an evil kindergarten teacher and promises to take her back to the village since it's dangerous for a girl to be alone. But something about her makes him suspicious. As they head to the village, Hazen asks Lynn why she understands the Cuman language. Lynn replies that she trades with them, explaining that she sells the jewels of the tribe for money. Hazen is surprised to hear this, since he always assumed the Cuman tribe harmed little brats. But Lynn reveals that harming children is actually a taboo for the Cumans, which explains why she feels safe moving around them. Hazen is equally surprised at how smart Lynn sounds, so he decides to examine her using magic. When he does, he freezes after seeing the massive amount of magical power inside her. Her eyes even remind him of someone dangerous from his past life. Lynn notices him zoning out, and when she asks if he's okay, Hazen quickly regains himself and lies that he's fine. Hazen then decides to share his analysis with her. He explains that her overflowing magic is the reason why she can't grow anymore. When Hazen asks if she can use magic, Lynn tries to laugh it off, saying she's just a commoner who was abandoned at an orphanage and has no parents. When they finally arrive at the village, everything looks normal, as the Cuman tribe hasn't caused any damage. But the moment the villagers see that the Imperial army brought Cuman prisoners, they lose their minds and start throwing stones at the captured Cuman wizard. They're furious because the Cuman warriors have sent many of their loved ones to the great beyond. But Hazen immediately stops the villagers from committing murder. He warns them that it's forbidden to abuse prisoners, and if they continue, he'll have to punish them according to military code. But one villager yells at Hazen to shut his stinking mouth and says they don't care about his military rules. Seeing how stubborn they are, Hazen threatens them. He tells them that if they refuse to follow orders, he'll simply free the Cuman wizard and let him wipe out the entire village in a single night if he feels like it. Hearing this, the villager freezes instantly. Hazen also tells all of them that the Imperial soldiers will only protect citizens who follow the rules. But the villagers start crying about how the army always arrives late and how their loved ones died because of that lateness. Hazen apologizes, saying it's the army's duty to protect them. But he adds that war doesn't care about excuses, and if they want to be defended, they need to cooperate. Hazen also says that people who choose not to fight for revenge, yet justify attacking a defenseless enemy, make him sick. His words stop the villagers cold as guilt immediately washes over them. With everything settled in the village, Hazen then walks away with Baz and asks Lynn if she can guide him to her orphanage. Lynn agrees, but she's confused about whether Hazen plans to buy something from the orphanage, since they don't sell anything in the orphanage. But Hazen shocks everyone when he says he's not planning on making any purchase at all. His actual intention is to adopt her. When they get to the orphanage later on, the first thing Hazen does is drop a shiny gold coin on the table like he's tipping a bartender. Then he asks if he can adopt Lynn, but the director, Norway, is stunned by the request. With the orphanage falling apart like an abandoned Minecraft, Hazen offers to pay the director a small silver coin every month in exchange for Lynn. Before the director can respond, Hazen explains that he values Lynn's skills and also the fact that she can somehow trade with the Cuman tribe. The director is shocked to hear that Lynn has been trading with the Cuman, but Lynn explains that she only wanted to help the orphanage in any way she could. However, Lynn refuses Hazen's offer of 1 silver coin per month and boldly demands he doubles it to 2 silver coins. Instead of arguing, Hazen simply smiles and agrees, and with the deal sealed, they leave the orphanage together. On the way back, Hazen tells Lynn that from now on she'll stay in his room. Lynn, shocked, almost falls off the horse and immediately refuses. Hazen tries tempting her by saying his room is spotless, unlike the pigsty she lived in at the orphanage, but Lynn still turns him down. Instead of getting annoyed, Hazen is impressed that she can talk back at him. He admires her courage and business sense, and he's already planning to use her skills to raise money and fuel his rise to power in the Empire. As they continue the journey, Hazen brings up Lynn's magic issue and offers to teach her how to use it. He reminds her that her small stature comes from the massive amount of magic inside her, and warns that if it ever awakens and she can't control it, she might explode. Hazen also gives Lynn a few tips on negotiating better in the future. He tells her that back at the orphanage, she undervalued herself and should have insisted on 5 large gold coins up front and 3 small silver coins monthly. Lynn nearly faints hearing such huge numbers, but Hazen advises her not to let emotions cloud her judgment next time. When Lynn asks what would have happened if she'd been too greedy and demanded something insane like 100 gold coins, Hazen tells her that would have been stupid, because he could accuse her of illegal trading with foreigners and make her his slave. Finally, Hazen opens up and tells Lynn that his goal is to train her to negotiate more effectively, since he plans to use her as an intermediary between the Empire and the Cuman tribe. A few hours later, they arrive at the camp, and Riifa immediately swoops Lynn up like some cool aunt, excited to have someone she now sees as a little sister. But while walking around, Hazen suddenly spots a formation of cavalry gathered near the fortress. When he asks Baz who's in charge, Baz explains that they're Mospa's cavalry, preparing to depart as reinforcements. Hazen is shocked, unable to believe it took them half a day just to get ready. But Baz explains the soldiers have almost no combat experience, and to make it worse, the lieutenant leading them is a princess who is terrified of getting injured. Just then, one knight starts screaming Hazen's name like a maniac. When Hazen asks who the heck he is, the knight removes his face armor, and Hazen realizes it's Mospa. Mospa is confident Hazen must have run from the Cuman tribe after suffering defeat. But Hazen calmly replies that he and his team actually defeated the Cuman warriors and ensured the village was safe before returning. As proof, he shows Mospa the Cuman prisoners, and Mospa immediately starts choking on his own ego. Trying to save whatever pride he has left, Mospa accuses Hazen of disobeying his orders by not waiting for reinforcement, but Hazen explains that they prioritized the villagers' safety. Mospa then accuses Hazen of trying to steal all the credit, but Hazen tells him he'd love to hear his better strategy if he has one. Instead of answering, Mospa rants about how there was obviously a magic fight, and it would have been a disaster if Hazen had lost. But Hazen looks him dead in the eye and says he can't lose because he has the backing of the 8th Battalion. Hearing this makes Mospa burst out laughing as he mocks the 8th Battalion as useless peasants who can barely read. But when he points at the entire battalion and calls them disposable farmers pulled straight from the fields, Hazen loses it as his aura immediately goes pitch black. He draws his magic wand and then warns Mospa not to cross the line. Mospa instantly gets scared and scurries off with his cosplay knights, claiming he's only leaving because the captain, Lorenzo, will be visiting the camp that night. The following morning, Hazen is summoned to the captain's office, where he finds Captain Lorenzo already waiting for him to give a report on the battle with the Cuman tribe. Lorenzo greets him with a warm smile, but Mospa barges in right after, panicking the moment he sees Hazen inside. He leans in and angrily whispers that Hazen shouldn't be there and demands he leave immediately. Hazen obeys like a dutiful soldier, but when he tells Lorenzo he's leaving, Lorenzo is confused and asks why. Hazen, being petty on purpose, tells him that Mospa ordered him to leave. Mospa freezes and immediately denies it, lying that he was only warning Hazen not to be disrespectful toward the captain. So with Mospa's forced permission, Hazen begins his report. Hazen starts by explaining that his plan is to propose a prisoner exchange with the Cuman tribe in order to establish a ceasefire. Mospa rudely interrupts Hazen while he speaks, but Lorenzo tells him to shut the heck up and then asks Hazen to continue since he is interested and wants to hear more. Hazen then breaks down the current military situation. The Empire is stuck between two powerful forces in the northern region, and because the Empire wants to expand, conflict became inevitable. But the Cuman tribe's mountain territory has little value, so the smarter move is to stop fighting them and focus on the Duchy of Diord instead. Lorenzo is impressed with Hazen's plan, but he's curious about how Hazen intends to negotiate with the Cumans when they don't speak the same language. Hazen tells him he already sorted that out, and explains that he hired a little girl from the orphanage who can speak the Cuman language to act as an interpreter. Lorenzo is stunned to learn Hazen plans on relying on a little girl, but Hazen assures him the plan will work, and the girl will be safe since the Cuman tribe doesn't harm brats. Lorenzo sighs and then agrees to take the proposal to the higher-ups, but promises not to mention Hazen's name if things go wrong. Hazen's plan clearly excites Lorenzo because he smiles and says that if the ceasefire succeeds, Hazen may earn a huge special merit. Mospa overhears the part where Hazen will get a special merit and turns pale. Filled with jealousy, the gremlin immediately tries twisting the situation, saying the merit should go to Lorenzo instead since he approved the reckless proposal. Mospa keeps insisting Hazen shouldn't even be considered for such an award since he's only been a second lieutenant for a month. Even though Lorenzo doesn't fully agree, he knows Mospa is technically right, so he apologizes to Hazen. But Hazen tells him he is fine and his only concern is the success of the ceasefire. Following that, Hazen then asks Captain Lorenzo if they can talk for a bit, and the captain actually agrees. Hazen brings up an old strategist named Gil Sasuzara, a hero from a time when the Empire was still small, and Lorenzo admits he's heard of him. Hazen explains that according to Gil Sasuzara's doctrine, there are 4 types of soldiers. The first are soldiers with skill and insane willpower, perfect frontline material. The second are those with no willpower but plenty of skill, These belong in the rear as strategists. The third type has neither will nor skill, so they should be thrown onto the front lines and forced to fight. And finally, there's the last type, those with plenty of willpower but absolutely no skill, like the useless Mospa. Hazen says the old strategist recommended that these types of idiots be put to death immediately. Hearing this, Captain Lorenz freezes in shock like someone unplugged his brain for a second. But Hazen simply wraps up his report like he didn't just drop a landmine, bows, and leaves. However, as he walks out the door, Lorenzo is still frozen, wondering what kind of terrifying guy Hazen actually is. The following week, Lynn is in the prison area learning basic words from the Cuman wizard and other prisoners, and they're all excited to teach her. The Cuman wizard even starts joking about marrying her, but Lynn freaks out and shuts it down instantly. Meanwhile, Hazen and Baz spy on her, and Hazen is genuinely impressed by how fast Lynn is improving. She's not only learning how to hold conversations with the Cumans, but also picking up their manners and customs. Hazen now has enough information to prepare for the negotiations, but he feels there must be someone else besides Lynn who can speak both the Empire's language and Cuman. When Hazen asks Lynn about it, Lynn panics and denies it, insisting no one taught her the language and she learned it all by herself. Hazen doesn't buy it, so he breaks down how language learning works. He tells her there are two main ways to learn a foreign language: intuitively during childhood or later in life, by understanding the structure of the language and learning it as a second language. Hazen insists the second method is clearly her case, and she must have learned it from a merchant who likely handled trade with the Cumans in the first place. Realizing Hazen has figured everything out, Lynn finally admits there's someone else who knows the Cuman language, but she promised not to expose them. When Hazen promises not to arrest the person, Lynn takes him to the merchant. The merchant admits he was terrified at first when he heard the army was looking for him, but seeing how young Hazen is helps him relax a bit. Hazen immediately gets down to business and asks why he can speak the Cuman language. The hairy guy tries to play dumb, pretending he doesn't understand the question. But Hazen, expecting exactly that, drops a legal document on the table stating that anything the man says won't get him punished. With that protection guaranteed, the hairy merchant finally begins to talk. He admits he actually learned the Cuman language from a Cuman lady he used to date in the past. As for Lynn, he says he taught her the Cuman language because he needed a brat who could help him get Cuman amulets and crafts, since the Cuman tribe are very fond of young brats. But right then, the merchant stops talking, suddenly sensing that Hazen must have some dark motive for wanting to know so much. Hazen doesn't sugarcoat. He admits his motive is to start trading with the Cuman tribe once the ceasefire happens. The merchant freezes at the mention of a ceasefire, since the war between the Cumans and the Empire has been going on for years, and too much blood has already been spilled. But Hazen assures him the ceasefire will happen and everything is already in motion. But this makes the merchant start thinking, and he realizes that for Hazen to contact him this early, despite planning to trade after the ceasefire, can only mean one thing. Hazen must be planning to smuggle goods. So being the business-minded gremlin he is, he immediately tries to strike a deal with Hazen. But Hazen shuts him down, saying legitimate traders deserve fair profit. Hazen says the only thing he wants is the right to the first trade negotiations, and Lynn will be the one to decide the price. After thinking for a moment, the merchant realizes Hazen might be the smartest business negotiator alive since Warren Buffet, so he accepts the deal and teases Lynn for bagging herself a smart guy. He admits he always thought Imperial soldiers only used their positions to enrich themselves, but Hazen is built differently. The merchant then opens up about his past, explaining how his Cuman lover was executed by her tribe for dating an Imperial man like him. But Hazen couldn't care less about his tragic love story, so he brushes him off, saying he isn't the emotional type and everything he does is for his own benefit and goals. 3 days later, Hazen, Lynn, Baz, and Riifa finally head into Cuman territory to negotiate the ceasefire. But the moment they arrive, the whole tribe goes on edge. Warriors surround them with spears raised, ready to poke holes in anyone wearing an Imperial coat. Seeing that Hazen and his squad aren't acting hostile, the Cumans escort them deeper into the village to meet the tribal chief. When they get inside the leader's hut, they kneel, greet her respectfully and Hazen introduces himself. But the leader, the Blue Queen Basia, isn't smiling. She does admit she's impressed that Hazen's team has mastered their language and customs, but then she asks if Hazen is dumb enough to think they're leaving alive after marching in to request a ceasefire. Just as the Queen says those words, the Cuman warriors immediately surround Hazen and the team, pointing their weapons at them again. When Queen Basia asks whether Hazen prefers to be impaled, decapitated, or publicly displayed, Hazen tries to diffuse the tension by calmly apologizing for the sudden visit. Lynn panics and tries to escape, but a warrior stops her by pointing his spear directly at her face. But the Queen instantly scolds the brainless warrior for threatening the young girl. Hazen sees the situation as the perfect opening to exploit. So he boldly calls the Queen soft for refusing to harm Lynn and says that softness is exactly why the Cuman tribe is losing the war. But the Queen stands her ground, explaining that they are a proud clan of warriors who don't indiscriminately unalive women and little ones, unlike the corrupt empire that takes the life of anyone just to enrich themselves. Hazen admits she's right, but then tells her that this is exactly why the empire wouldn't hesitate to seize their land if they ever found it valuable. The Queen is confused, wondering what the heck Hazen is talking about. So Hazen explains that after examining the staff of one of the Cuman wizards, he discovered that Cuman territory sits on a natural deposit of magical gems. The Queen is stunned, wondering how Hazen uncovered one of their greatest secrets. But Hazen tells her the only reason the Cuman tribe is still breathing is because the Empire currently sees their land as worthless. The moment the Empire learns about the treasure beneath it, every neighboring country will start fighting over their territory. When the Queen asks why he hasn't informed the Empire already, Hazen shocks her with his bluntness. He straight up admits he wants the gems for himself. The Queen nearly pops a vein at his audacity and immediately orders her guards to chop off his head. But Hazen asks that before they behead him, the Queen should at least examine his magic wand. She agrees, so a guard hands it to her. After looking it over, the Queen admits it's a pretty good wand, but she doesn't see anything special. But when Hazen explains he crafted the wand himself 2 years ago, the Queen is stunned that an Imperial soldier could make something of such high quality and demands to know how he did it. Hazen admits he stole the technique, and since magical gems are needed to craft a perfect wand, he needs their gems, and in return, the Cuman tribe wants magic wands to boost their military strength. Hazen adds that once the ceasefire is established, they can discreetly supply him with gems, and together they can build a private trade network long before the Empire realizes the gems even exist. After thinking it over, the Queen sees it's a sweet deal, but she still wants to know why an Imperial soldier is so eager to betray his country. Hazen smirks and replies that he's the kind of soldier who only pursues his own ambitions, and he never planned to serve the Empire anyway. Hearing this makes the Queen warm up to him, and she admits her tribe can't stay weak any longer. Enemies keep advancing, and without stronger forces, they'll be wiped out. However, she says she won't just accept his deal blindly, since they're a clan of warriors who don't trust the vulnerable too easily. So she calls forward Ories, the second strongest gladiator in the land, and declares that Hazen must duel him to prove he's strong enough to trust. Just then, the Cuman tribe starts hyping and chanting for Ories to smash Hazen like an overripe plantain. So Queen Basia announces that the last man standing will be declared the winner and signals the start of the duel. Ories instantly summons a massive ice dragon made of crystal. As the dragon charges at Hazen full speed, Hazen dodges, flipping through ice shards like a cat that learned parkour. Realizing Shadow Fang won't defeat the ice dragon, Hazen decides to activate a strange type of magic that leaves Ories shocked and wondering what kind of monster he is fighting. As someone who has lived on 2 continents, Hazen is familiar with 2 distinct magic systems. One uses chants and seals, the other uses wands. No one is supposed to be able to travel between continents, but somehow he did, and he chose wands because they let him cast spells faster. Suddenly, Hazen starts attacking with multiple wands, but Ories stays confident in his ice dragon as it keeps firing ice shards at Hazen. But Hazen blocks the attack by summoning Earth Shield, leaving Ories shocked. Hazen then counters with a second wand in his other hand, and Oryx is beyond surprised since dual-wielding magic like that should be impossible. Next, Hazen whips out a special wand called Gizar, which specializes in one massive attack per day. The moment he fires it at the ice dragon, the dragon instantly shatters on impact. Oryx can't believe it, but Hazen isn't done. He calmly pulls out another wand that lets him manipulate magic remotely. With it, he shoots black tendrils that pin Oryx in place before he even realizes what's happening. Oryx is confused, wondering where and how the black tendrils emanated from. But Hazen tells him that the real trick in wizard battles is deception, and Oryx is way too honest for this world. With Oryx trapped and unable to move, Queen Basia announces the end of the duel. As the dust settles, both the Queen and Oryx are curious to know how Hazen manages to pull off his multiple wand trick. So Hazen explains that he wears a ring called Jenko, which lets him make his wand invisible and swap between wands instantly. Hazen says it's just a little trick, but to the Queen, who is already simping for his overpowered magic skills, it's no mere trick, it's a monstrous feat. Hazen then offers to supply them with several magic wands to prove he's serious about the ceasefire, and the Queen agrees, saying it's wiser to keep him as a friend than an enemy. With the Queen now fully convinced Hazen can be trusted, she takes him by the hand and announces to the entire tribe that a ceasefire agreement has been reached with the Empire. Hazen expects some of the Cuman warriors to oppose the decision, but the tribe respects Queen Basia far too much to defy her. With the peace agreement settled, Queen Basia instantly switches from serious queen to party queen and orders her people to roll out the booze. Hazen refuses to drink, claiming alcohol messes with his pea-sized brain. But Basia tells him that if he doesn't drink, the peace deal is over, so Riifa immediately volunteers to drink everything on Hazen's behalf. While the party is ongoing, Hazen introduces Lynn to Queen Basia and explains that Lynn will be the mediator for the trade. He asks the Queen to help Lynn gain some experience in negotiation, and Basia agrees since she's already growing fond of the little cutie. The vibe gets warm and the Queen even toasts Hazen, admitting that the day was one of the best moments of her life. They drink, eat, and the tribe parties like festival season came early. The next day at the fortress, Hazen shows up at Mospa's office with an official ceasefire agreement document from the Cumans, and Mospa instantly freaks out, unable to believe Hazen managed to pull it off. He immediately assumes the document must be forged, but Hazen calmly tells him that Queen Basia will come later to formalize everything herself. Mospa almost has a heart attack hearing this. When he asks Hazen if he has reported the news to Captain Lorenzo, Hazen says he has yet, since he was instructed to report to him first. That's all Mospa needs to hear to start scheming about how to steal the special merit for himself. So he tries twisting everything in his favor by suggesting the entire 4th Company receive the merit, since the 8th Platoon is technically part of it. But Hazen immediately shuts that down, insisting that the 4th Company only gets the merit if Mospa takes full responsibility for the 8th Platoon as well. Mospa desperately tries to convince Hazen to let him claim the merit without taking any responsibility. But for every attempt, Hazen keeps shutting him down with logic so clean that it hurts him so badly. So when Mospa can't handle the frustration anymore, he snaps and tries to slap Hazen as some kind of disciplinary action. But Hazen doesn't even flinch. He simply pulls a fan from his coat and slices the air so sharply that it sends Mospa flying across the room like trash being swept aside. Mospa sits on the floor like the worthless coward he is, screaming that Hazen tried to murder him. But Hazen calmly tells him he only tried to squash an insect and will do the same to anything that tries to corrupt the Empire. When Mospa managed to wobble back to his feet, he tries to argue again, but Hazen reminds him he's keeping the captain waiting. Realizing Hazen is serious about reporting to Lorenzo, Mospa tries another trick, insisting Hazen repeat exactly what he wants him to say, that the 4th Company deserves the special reward. But Hazen gets on his nerves by repeating it word for word in the most chaotic, literal way possible, which makes Mospa lose his mind again. However, just as the back-and-forth reaches peak comedy, someone appears at the door, and it's Captain Lorenzo, who says his ears were about to rot listening to Mospa's lies and manipulation. Turns out he had been at the door the whole time, listening from the beginning, because Hazen already warned him Mospa would pull something shady. Disappointed by everything he's heard, Lorenzo says he'll request Mospa's demotion and promote Hazen instead. Hearing this, Mospa collapses at Lorenzo's feet and starts begging like his life is about to end. However, Lorenzo tells him that, although it's unofficial for now, based on authority, Hazen has already been appointed the lieutenant of the 4th Company. Just then, Hazen asks for one small favor. He wants Mospa reassigned to the 4th Company. Hearing this, Mospa almost dies on the spot, but Hazen explains that since Mospa has a habit of bullying recruits, keeping him within arm's reach means he can punish Mospa if he ever tries it again. Lorenzo agrees but warns Hazen not to go overboard with revenge, and Hazen nods, promising he'll only crush Mospa's rotten spirit completely. Meanwhile, Mospa is still face down on the floor trying to beg Lorenzo to reconsider. But Lorenzo completely ignores the soggy loser like dog poop and instead congratulates Hazen for becoming a lieutenant in just a month. Hazen nods, but then says they need to move to the next step quickly, and Lorenzo gets nervous, wondering what that even means. Later that day at the camp, Hazen walks in and finds Riifa chilling with little Lynn asleep on her lap. When Hazen asks why Lynn is sleeping in the middle of a hot afternoon, Riifa explains that she's knocked out from all the mountain walking they did on the way back from the Cuman village. Hazen nods and agrees to let her rest, but then Hazen quietly says they won't have peace for long because their next mission is a full-scale war against the neighboring country, the Duchy of Diordo. Riifa panics hearing this, while Lynn shoots up from sleep like she just heard a gunshot. Riifa thinks the war is too sudden, but before she can argue further, Hazen hands a sealed letter to Lynn and tells her to take it straight to Queen Basia. Following that, Hazen starts checking on how business is. He asks Lynn about Nandaru's trade, and she tells him they've got Magatama ready and more jewels coming. Hazen is impressed with how well things are going with business, but he reasons that the market value of the jewel will crash if they dump everything at once. The next day, Hazen meets with Lorenzo to propose going to war with the Duchy of Diordo. But Lorenzo argues that the timing is wrong and the logistics are a nightmare. Hazen keeps insisting it's the perfect moment, but Lorenzo says that even though he respects Hazen, launching a war right now would be reckless. On top of that, Lorenzo suddenly remembers a bigger problem. The duchy has General Gizar, a lightning mage built like the final boss. After learning about this powerful mage, Hazen admits that lightning mages are rare and extremely powerful, so realizing it's pointless to keep arguing, he decides to leave. However, in his head, Hazen is already 10 steps ahead. To him, this chaos is useful. It breaks a 10-year stalemate, and that alone is worth moving. Later that day at the training ground, Mospa can't even ride a common horse and flies off like loose laundry. Hazen watches the comedy happening right in front of him, unable to believe that a former lieutenant can't even sit on a horse properly. He once asked Lorenzo how this incompetent idiot ever became a lieutenant, and Lorenzo explained it was simply because Mospa is the 5th son of a 9th-ranked noble. Having watched Mospa train for days, Hazen concludes the guy has garbage magic skills, a horrible personality, and the IQ of a wet sock. Hazen sighs, knowing Mospa is nothing but a useless detriment, and even wonders out loud if he should just unalive him. But Mospa hears him and starts bragging and cursing, which angers Hazen off. So Hazen slashes his hand with his magic wand, causing blood to drip. Even with a wounded hand, Mospa keeps bragging, calling himself a noble and saying Hazen, as a commoner, should treat him with respect. With a deadpan look, Hazen reminds him that rank matters in the military, so he had better learn some manners. Still, Mospa keeps going on about his noble lineage, so Hazen decides it's time to crush his pride. He tells Mospa that not only is he trash at his job, but his own family basically wants nothing to do with him. Hearing this, Mospa is shocked, wondering how Hazen knows so much about him, and starts shaking like a faulty washing machine. But Hazen isn't done. He reveals how Mospa used connections to pass the officer exam and has been enjoying military life by flattering his superiors. However, Mospa denies everything, insisting they're just insults with no evidence. But Hazen doesn't argue. Instead, he reminds Mospa of all the second lieutenants and warrant officers he bullied to death before his arrival. When Mospa tries to act dumb, Hazen pulls out a whole diary of abused sergeants, testimonies, and starts flipping through it. Seeing the diary in the open, Mospa panics, yet still tries to defend himself by saying the testimonies don't count as solid evidence. But Hazen basically tells him he's too stupid to realize everyone already knew and just kept quiet. At that moment, Mospa looks around and finally realizes that everyone in the training unit is staring at him with pure irritation. Realizing he's finished, Mospa shoves his pride aside and starts begging for mercy on his hands and knees. After watching Mospa grovel like a pig with zero dignity, Hazen hands Baz the book of testimonies and orders him to discipline Mospa thoroughly. However, before leaving, Hazen also tells Baz that if Mospa looks like he's about to die during the beating, he should let him know, and he will bring the idiot back as many times as needed. Baz agrees, though he looks like he's trying to swallow his own fear. Meanwhile, on the other side of the map, at the fortress of the Duchy of Diordo, General Gizar is bored out of his skull, complaining that nothing exciting ever happens. He's sitting on the fortress walls, literally praying for the Empire to attack just so he can fight something. But right in the middle of his boredom tantrum, some random soldier interrupts and says someone wants to see him in private. This makes the nutcase smile, instantly assuming it must involve violence. So he excitedly follows the soldier, but when he arrives, he finds Mospa poorly disguised under a hoodie. When Gizar asks what he wants, Mospa introduces himself as an Imperial officer and then immediately begs him to eliminate Captain Lorenzo and Hazen. A few days later at the Arjade Fortress, General Gizar gathers the rest of the land officials and suggests they go to war with the Empire. The cavalry commander, Niddle, gets hyped for absolutely no reason, screaming along even though he clearly doesn't understand a single thing. Meanwhile, the infantry commander, a dude with Saitama bald head, tries to calm everyone down so they can actually hear the full story. Once the room settles, Landbrew, the guard commander, decides to explain what happened a few days earlier. He starts by describing the incident between Gizar and Mospa. Days ago, Mospa had given Gizar an imperial document as evidence that the Empire was planning to launch an attack against them. But Gizar is curious to know why an imperial officer would want to betray the Empire. Mospa is about to lose his mind as he explains that a new second lieutenant, Hazen, is the one who took everything from him. Gizar is shocked that this drama is over a junior officer. When he asks why Mospa can't even manage his own subordinates, Mospa snaps that Hazen is no ordinary subordinate. In pure frustration, he explains that Hazen just concluded a ceasefire with the Cuman tribe and is even behind the momentum for an attack against them. When Gizar demands to know what Mospa stands to gain by being such a useless traitor, Mospa states that all he wants is for Gizar to eliminate Hazen and Captain Lorenzo. The moment Gizar agrees to take care of them, Mospa lights up with excitement and starts laughing like a cartoon villain who finally thinks he's won. Back in the present, after sharing the whole story, Gizar suggests to the officials that they'll need reinforcements from the capital if they want to start a war. He's so hyped about the idea that he confidently claims he'll raise an army and capture the Empire's fortress in just 10 days. When Landbrew, the guard commander, asks how they should handle the Cuman tribe, Gizar says that 5,000 men are enough to hold them back. Fired up by the plan, Commander Niddle practically explodes with energy, thrilled that they can finally counter Hazen and the Empire using everything Mospa revealed. Niddle even suggests capturing Hazen alive to have a chat with him. But when someone reminds him of Gizar's promise to Mospa to eliminate Hazen, Gizar himself announces he has no intention of keeping any promise to a lowly traitor. Meanwhile, days later, news reaches the northern Garna fortress that a massive army led by General Gizar is already heading their way. The warning arrives late, and panic spreads instantly. Lorenzo and Hazen rush through the corridors as the fortress scrambles for answers. They finally reach the meeting hall, where the colonel looks frustrated and overwhelmed. Lorenzo immediately demands the colonel listen to Hazen's plan, but the colonel isn't in the mood for theories. He wants solutions, not lectures. But Hazen steps forward and stuns everyone by claiming he can defeat General Gizar alone, and then explains that once Gizar falls, the entire Duchy army will collapse. The colonel looks at him like he's high on something and immediately orders him to leave with his delusions. Lorenzo steps in and insists they trust Hazen and give him a chance. He reminds the room that Hazen was the one who secured the peace agreement with the Cuman tribe by earning their respect. Still, the colonel refuses to budge, while Hazen stands there composed, quietly wondering how a command room can have this little decisive thinking. When Hazen finally speaks, he asks the colonel who he thinks a mage is. The colonel says a mage is someone who uses magic, but Hazen counters with something sharper. A mage is someone who makes the impossible possible. Hazen then tells the colonel that he doesn't have the luxury of options at a moment like this. If he chooses to flee without fighting, demotion is certain. But if he trusts him, he'll go down in history as the hero who defended the duchy fortress with half the troops. Hazen leaves the weight of that decision hanging, then leans in and assures the colonel that just like the genie from Aladdin, he can grant his wish. One meathead official immediately calls Hazen out for disrespecting the colonel. But when Hazen asks the fathead if he has any brilliant ideas, the dumbbrick goes silent on the spot. Since no one has anything better to offer, Hazen assures everyone in the room that if they entrust the battle to him, he'll show them a victory they never imagined possible. Captain Lorenzo doesn't hesitate to pledge his support and requests that Hazen be given the authority of a captain. Hazen is shocked Lorenzo would go that far, but Lorenzo stands firm. To him, Hazen is like a storm that arrived exactly when the fortress needed one. Lorenzo thinks back on all the disgrace he's witnessed there. Corruption, incompetence, ego, and decides that if stepping aside means letting someone actually capable take charge, then he'll do it. Just then, the colonel slams the table with a loud bang to silence everyone. With a dead serious expression, he agrees to let Hazen battle Gizar, but warns him that if he loses, he will be executed. Then he adds that if Hazen wins, he'll be transferred out of the northern Garna fortress and will never set foot there again. The colonel then orders Lorenzo to hand over all his captain's authority to Hazen. Lorenzo is stressed but also relieved because he knows Hazen is built different. So he hands everything over, bows deeply, and outright pleads with Hazen to save the fortress. Hours later, Hazen and Lorenzo start planning for the coming siege. Lorenzo's now officially under Hazen's command, so he asks what he's supposed to do next. Hazen keeps it simple. He wants Lorenzo to act as the bridge between them and the upper ranks, since the colonels won't exactly listen to him directly. Lorenzo's relieved, because he assumed Hazen would force him to speak formally and treat him the same way he treated Mospa. But Hazen tells him he only cares that Lorenzo shows basic respect in public and keeps their usual tone in private. Then they get into the strategy. The enemy has 50,000 troops, while they've only got 15,000, so it's going to be a defensive battle. On top of that, Gizar's bodyguards are absurdly strong, but Hazen isn't planning to sit around and wait. He tells Lorenzo he'll go out and take down Gizar before the siege even starts. In his absence, Hazen wants Lorenzo to take charge of the troops while he, as the mage, goes to cause confusion inside the enemy fortress. When Lorenzo asks what Hazen's exact plan is, Hazen admits it's hard to predict where the attack will come from east, west, north, or south, so they'll need his support across all defensive units. But Lorenzo shows how nervous he is. He complains that the enemy cavalry is strong and will most likely target the central gate. That's when Hazen brings up Riifa. He tells Lorenzo to use her in the defense, hinting that she'll impress him. Lorenzo thanks him, though he's still anxious and his hands are shaking. So Hazen stops and asks what Lorenzo thinks is expected from a superior officer at a time like this. Lorenzo lists things like judgment and forgiveness. Hazen shoots each one down. What he actually wants is simple. A superior officer should genuinely consider their subordinates' opinions and make use of the people who are truly competent. Hearing this gives Lorenzo courage, and he admits Hazen has a way of persuading people. He reaches out, shakes Hazen's hand, and agrees to help 100%. Then the day of the battle arrives. As the duchy army's roar echoes all the way to the fortress walls, the imperial soldiers tremble like pathetic weaklings, some even breaking down completely. They're outnumbered more than 3-1, so Hazen isn't surprised morale is in the gutter. The whole fortress feels heavy and hopeless, which worries him and makes him wonder how to hype them up. While checking preparations and ordering soldiers to inspect their gear, Hazen bumps into Baz. Baz's face looks way brighter than everyone else's, and he even thanks Hazen for his hard work. When Hazen asks why he isn't gloomy like the rest, Baz says he's confident because they have Hazen by their side. Hazen is stunned and reminds him they're outnumbered, but Baz still says it's no problem. Seeing Baz is a little too confident, Hazen tries to ground him, saying he can't guarantee everyone survives. But Baz shrugs it off, saying soldiers are always prepared for death. Hearing that, Hazen goes quiet for a second. Then he takes out his magic staff and decides to hype up the entire fortress at once. Hazen's voice blasts across the walls like he swallowed a JBL speaker, freaking out even the officers who don't know it's magic amplification. He tells everyone straight up that the battle will be decided in 3 days, and desertion in front of the enemy means death. Some soldiers panic, but he follows up with a promise. Half of them will survive, and if they hold for 3 days, they'll break the siege and rescue will come. He finishes by telling them to trust their training, their bodies, and their comrades. By the end of the speech, the entire garrison wakes up, morale blasting through the roof. Hazen orders them to raise their voices, and the soldiers roar back like an actual army again. While standing on the roof relieved at what he's done, Riifa approaches and teases him for shouting, which is way out of character. Hazen simply says there are a few people he wouldn't want to see die, then hops down from the fortress roof. He leaves the fortress to Lorenzo, saying he can handle everything with morale this high. Meanwhile, on the duchy side, their troops are ready, and Gizar is more than ready. His men signal that all troops are in position. Gizar grins and tells them they'll break through the center. Before he calls for the charge, he hypes up his own troops, yelling that this battle is huge, and it's finally time to pay the Empire back for all the trauma they suffered. His soldiers roar behind him, but right before he shouts charge, something weird happens. The ground starts shaking and the Empire troops roar louder than thunder. The duchy soldiers freeze, confused and terrified, while even Gizar hesitates. Their morale is insanely high, way higher than a smaller army should have. Gizar immediately suspects Hazen, remembering what Mospa hinted at. His advisor asks if they should switch to a slow strategy, but Gizar refuses. He knows the Empire is waiting for their war god, Maishil, to arrive, and if they delay, the advantage flips, so they're going all out at once. With that, he orders a full-force assault, arrows fly, cavalry charges, and the battlefield explodes with movement. Inside the fortress, defenders brace behind shields as arrows rain down. Even Hazen admits that losing people this early hurts when their numbers are so small, but he's already executing his own plan. He slips out the side gate, sneaks behind enemy lines, and steals a fallen soldier's armor to blend in. Meanwhile, the enemy archers, Commander is keeping his men calm, reminding them to maintain rhythm. But Hazen crawls up the ramparts and takes the Commander out with a clean surprise attack. The guy's head separates from his body, hitting the ground, and chaos immediately spreads through the ranks. The duchy soldiers start panicking, yelling about an assassin, but Hazen quietly slips away again, thinking that setting a few fires should finish the job. Back in the fortress, Lorenzo gets a report that the enemy archers are weakening. He instantly knows this is Hazen's work, so he rallies the troops, telling them they'll hold until sunset. So the defenders push back harder, and the whole fortress is fighting with way more control now. Meanwhile, Gizar watches the battlefield through his scope, trying to determine whether they're winning or stuck in a stalemate. When he asks if any prominent mages are on the enemy side, he's told no. It's actually Riifa taking down most of their soldiers with her arrows. While Gizar watches Riifa and admires her strength, another soldier rushes in, announcing the archer commander has been assassinated. Hearing this, Gizar wonders whether the commander died simply because he had no magic resistance, or if this is Hazen's doing. With the sun setting, Gizar orders a retreat, as he realizes Hazen is dangerous, but only in small-scale chaos. If they reorganize and strengthen defenses, Hazen will be useless, so Gizar decides that the next day they will go all out. So he calls for the cavalry commander, Niddle, and Niddle rides forward with confidence, promising to handle the situation. Later that night, Hazen returns from sabotaging the enemy camp. Lorenzo is relieved to see him and immediately asks if he was the one who assassinated the archer commander in Gizar's camp, since that move practically saved their lives. Hazen admits it was him, but in his usual deadpan way, says it was easy since morale was so high he could blend in as one of the enemy. Before leaving, Hazen casually jokes that Lorenzo and his team will be facing General Gizar on the battlefield the next day. Lorenzo panics on the spot, but before he can argue, Hazen just walks away. Later that night, Hazen checks on the injured soldiers. There are fewer casualties than expected, which is lucky but still serious. Just then, Baz shows up. So when Hazen asks if the soldiers lying on the floor are all the wounded, Baz says no and explains there are still more. Hazen then orders him to gather all the injured, but this makes Baz freak out, wondering if Hazen plans to heal every wounded soldier. But when Hazen himself confirms that his intention is to heal as many soldiers as possible, Baz starts to worry about him. Apparently, Hazen didn't sleep at all last night because he stayed all night strategizing about the war, and now he plans on exhausting himself more by healing all the wounded soldiers. But Hazen shuts down Baz's concern by reminding him he's the superior officer, and it's his responsibility to do more than anyone else here. After saying this, Hazen notices Baz staring at him like he's some fallen star. When Hazen asks what's wrong, Baz, completely touched, says he's never heard anyone say those words before. To explain himself, Hazen then drops some borderline emotional wisdom about how true leaders don't just issue orders. They carry heavier responsibilities. Baz is completely blown away hearing this, and at that moment his worldview gets rewritten on the spot. He straightens up like a real soldier and tells Hazen he admires him. Hazen is stunned but responds by telling Baz not to admire him. Hazen tells Baz that if he does what a subordinate needs to do and everyone else does the same, the army will naturally grow stronger. Still, Baz insists. He says he admires Hazen anyway, because it's rare to find someone with values like his. Very early the next day, the war drums hit again, and this time General Gizar's army is moving west. Hazen stands on the rampart, watching everything, and trusts Riifa to handle the west wing. On his end, he's ready to crush the Duchy cavalry commander and his troops, charging straight for the center. Seeing the Duchy soldiers rushing in with full force, prepared to smash through the middle like raging bulls, Hazen realizes they're way stronger than he expected. So he pulls out one of his magic staves and unleashes a spell called Ground Fury. At that instant, the entire battlefield begins to shake like an earthquake. Horses stumble, riders crash, and the entire formation collapses in seconds. But one enemy commander spots Hazen on the rampart and immediately orders the archers to aim. They fire a volley straight at him, only to watch in horror as their arrows twist midair and drop harmlessly to the ground. Hazen then jumps down to face Commander Niddle, but before the fight even starts, Niddle demands answers. First, he wants to know if the rumor is true. Can Hazen really wield multiple staves? And second, was Hazen the one who took out the archer commander? When Hazen confirms both, Niddle snaps. He reveals that the now-dead archer commander was his friend, and as his whole body starts shaking with rage, he declares that now he has more than enough reason to send Hazen to the afterlife. Raising his magic staff, Niddle activates his telekinesis, and suddenly millions of swords and spears start floating behind him. When he launches them at Hazen, Hazen dodges perfectly, moving like a full-time Matrix addict. He even defies gravity by flying into the sky, shocking the soul out of Niddle. But even after all that, the swords keep chasing him non-stop like they are bloodthirsty. So Hazen has no choice but to activate Wind Roar, which deflects all of them to the ground. But Niddle is just starting. As for his second attack, he summons a massive boulder the size of your crib and hurls it at Hazen. But Hazen doesn't flinch. Instead, he splits the boulder in half with a single swing of his staff. Niddle panics, unable to believe what he just witnessed, but Hazen simply tells him that if he has no other moves left, then it's time to call it checkmate. To end the fight once and for all, Hazen pulls out another staff like he's switching weapons in a video game. This one unleashes Permafrost Horizon, and suddenly, everything around him starts freezing over. Ice crawls across the battlefield, the air drops to frostbite-level cold, and Niddle's armor begins cracking, sending him into full panic. This ice-releasing staff is a modified weapon enhanced with the high-grade jewels from the Cuman tribe. Seeing how dangerous the attack is, Niddle calls for maximum support. But before anyone can move, the ground erupts into an ugly, unstable tornado of magical power. Suddenly, one of the floating swords Niddle had been controlling flips like a poker card and slices off his arm. Niddle collapses, unable to process what just happened. But Hazen doesn't hesitate. He takes advantage of the opening and slices off the commander's head. At that moment, the entire Duchy army charges forward to avenge their fallen commander. But Hazen steps back, because all that spell-slinging finally catches up to him and he nearly collapses. Baz rushes in and catches him, freaking out over whether Hazen is all right. But Hazen just brushes it off, and then immediately shifts his focus to the West Gate, because he knows the entire battle hinges on what happens there. Meanwhile, at the West Gate, a bunch of ugly, smug captains are watching the battlefield like they're reviewing a boring school project when Lorenz suddenly walks in, saying he's been assigned to support the area. But one of the captains, Shimant, immediately starts yelling that they don't need Lorenzo and calling him a disgrace for being demoted and outshined by Hazen. But Lorenzo doesn't care what the big-headed fool thinks about him. He's more worried about how their forces are completely outmatched by the enemy troops. Meanwhile, the other captains are laughing and celebrating their promotions like they've already won the entire war. Riifa notices how tense Lorenzo is. So she assures him she's ready whenever he needs her, but Lorenzo thinks they should observe for now. Then out of nowhere, something crashes down from the sky. When they look over the wall, they realize General Gizar himself has rolled up alone on horseback. Gizar points at the fortress wall, challenging any Imperial soldier brave enough to fight him one-on-one. He promises that if they somehow defeat him, the whole battle ends instantly, and the Empire gets all the glory. This triggers Shimant and the rest of the weak Imperial captains, because they can't handle being called cowards. One of the captains, Makazalu, immediately accepts the challenge. When Lorenzo tries to talk sense into him, Shimant, who fully supports Makazalu's actions, yells at Lorenzo to know his place and stay out of it. But the moment the duel begins, Gizar beheads Makazalu so fast that everyone watching from the wall doesn't even have time to blink. Lorenzo and Riifa are stunned, but now they fully understand why the rumors called Gizar a demon who moves at lightning speed, and they weren't exaggerations at all. After wiping Makazalu off the face of the earth like he just swatted a fly, Gizar, crackling with lightning, asks who wants to die next. Seeing Makazalu's severed head, Shimant and the other captain, Buoys, panic and immediately start screaming for the soldiers to advance and overwhelm Gizar with their numbers. Captain Buoys, who only came to the West Gate because he assumed Hazen would handle everything, tries to flee through his own soldiers, calling them meat shields and shoving them aside. But as he attempts to escape like a terrified little coward, Gizar catches up instantly, making it painfully clear no one is getting away safely, and in one smooth motion, he slices off Buoys' legs. As Buoys screams and panics over losing both legs, Gizar calls him a disgrace for letting his subordinates fight while he runs away. Buoys starts begging for his life and even tries bargaining, offering Gizar exactly what he wants. An entrance to the West Gate, but Gizar says men like him disgust him and then cuts off his head. Captain Shimant sees this and absolutely loses his mind. He starts screaming, "Retreat," over and over while running so fast his own body can barely keep up. He races to the West Gate and shouts at the soldiers to open it for him. But the gate guards refuse, knowing opening it would doom everyone. Lorenz grabs Shimant by the arm and tries to stop him, but the man is gone mentally, completely swallowed by fear. Meanwhile outside, Gizar raises a spark as a signal, and his army instantly charges like a tidal wave, moving with perfect unity while the Empire's side is frozen and its captains are scattered, paralyzed by fear. But right when the pressure hits its peak, Riifa steps forward with this calm determination and tells Lorenzo to leave everything to her. She activates an insane magic technique, known as Demon Armor Raging Bone, that wraps her in layers of magically formed bone armor. In seconds, she transforms into a monstrous armored warrior, covered from head to toe in bone plates. Even Gizar, who's been unfazed this whole time, suddenly feels a chill run down his spine because he has no idea what that weapon even is. While Gizar is still analyzing the situation, one eager idiot from his troops charges toward Riifa, desperate to claim a victory. but Riifa obliterates him faster than Eminem can drop a rap bar. The force of her attack is so brutal that it sends shockwaves across the battlefield, making even the strongest-looking soldiers freeze. The Principality commanders instantly scream for their elite, heavily armored soldiers, those wrapped head-to-toe in rare Madoma steel, to rush in and hold the front line. But before they can assemble, Riifa leaps into the sky like a demon and starts smashing through the armored knights with nothing but raw force. Gizar starts getting nervous as he watches her tear apart troops that were supposed to be unbreakable. Then Riifa picks up this massive segmented blade, and the moment she swings it, an enormous wave tears across the field. Lorenzo, watching from the wall, is stunned, as he realizes he never truly understood the meaning of dangerous until now. And while this madness is going on, Captain Meathead, Shimant, is suddenly hyped, yelling about how Hazen had a secret trump card the whole time, but asked everyone to fight until their lungs fall out. But Lorenzo is panicking because he knows they shouldn't push Riifa too hard since she's basically their entire defense right now. But just then, Gizar makes his move again, refusing to let more troops die under Riifa's blade. He tries to slice her down before she causes more damage, but he's shocked when even his attack can't pierce her bone armor. But instead of worrying, this only excites Gizar. He starts smiling like a psycho, thrilled that he's finally found the kind of fight he's been craving. For a brief moment, Riifa and Gizar keep staring at each other, and it feels like the whole fortress is holding its breath to see which one of them drops first. Meanwhile, Lorenzo is still trying to shut Shimant up as the idiot keeps bragging about Riifa's strength loud enough for the enemies to hear. But then out of nowhere, Gizar activates his signature attack, Dancing Peacock, and tries stabbing Riifa on the head with a massive amount of lightning. Even though Riifa's impenetrable bone armor makes it impossible for his blade to break through, Riifa still gets zapped hard inside. Riifa lets out a massive roar, and realizing the fight will drag on forever, Gizar decides to call it a day and orders his army to retreat. As the enemies pull back from the wall, Lorenzo notices that Riifa is wounded and dripping blood right inside her armor and try to calm her down. But at that moment, Hazen immediately shouts at Lorenzo to stay back because he can see what's about to happen. And immediately Lorenzo obeys. Leifa's body suddenly gives out, and she collapses so hard the ground literally cracks under her. Hazen rushes in and catches her before she hits the ground again, and the armor just breaks away from her, leaving her slumped in his arms. With a grateful smile, Hazen tells her that she defended the fortress better than anyone could have expected, and that without her, they wouldn't be standing right now. This makes Riifa laugh weakly, proud of what she did. Hazen immediately orders the nearby soldiers to get a stretcher, but the bozos start trembling behind their shields because they're still terrified of Riifa after watching that monstrous battle. Their attitude irritates Hazen, so he yells at them, asking if that's how they plan on repaying the person who just saved their worthless lives. Lorenzo steps in and tries to help, saying he'll carry her himself, but Hazen isn't even hearing it. He's too busy being pissed at the soldiers and orders them again to hurry up with the stretcher. Terrified, the soldiers rush in with the stretcher to carry Riifa to the infirmary. Lorenzo apologizes on their behalf, saying they were probably just scared, but Hazen isn't buying that nonsense. He reminds him that Riifa is the one who saved them from General Gizar and his army. Lorenzo tries arguing that not everyone is as strong as Hazen, but Hazen fires back that even a dog doesn't forget the debt of a meal and a place to sleep. Before leaving, Hazen turns and speaks directly to the soldiers still hiding behind their makeshift shields. He tells them that every one of them has people they care about deeply, people they'd throw themselves in front of a blade to protect. Then he asks how they'd feel if those same people called them a monster for doing exactly that. The words hit harder than a spell. The soldiers freeze, unable to respond. But Hazen just walks past them, telling them to actually think about who they're talking about and what they're saying. When Hazen gets inside the fortress, things gets even more heated because Captain Shimant starts bragging again, throwing careless words about Leifa being some kind of tool or monster they can rely on. But Hazen snaps at the pregnant goat, telling him never to call Riifa a monster again, and then reminds him that calling her a monster after she literally saved his life is diabolical. But Shimant keeps running his mouth, claiming the victory was thanks to him and his battalion, not Riifa. Hazen immediately cuts him off, saying he won't deploy Riifa ever again, and then asks him and his mighty squad to go ahead to handle General Gizar alone the next day. Sismont tries to use his authority to threaten Hazen, saying he would execute Hazen if he refuses to deploy Riifa, but Hazen calmly tells him to do as he wishes. Realizing that without Riifa they're basically doomed, panic sets in and Sismont bravado crumbles instantly. The fat buffoon gives up whatever pride he thought he had and practically begs Hazen to use Riifa again, but Hazen doesn't let him off easy. Hazen tells him straight up that his head is still held way too high for someone begging for a life-saving favor. His arrogance pisses Sismont off, and he snaps, asking Hazen if he's out of his mind. But Hazen doesn't flinch. He insists Sismont show some actual sincerity, like someone who really needs help. Eventually, the proud idiot ends up on the floor, fully bowing, desperate and begging to use Riifa for the next day's war. But even after all that groveling, Hazen still steps on his fat skull with his boot, and tells him that even the Emperor himself would have to bow if he wanted Riifa's help. Lorenzo, watching Hazen use Major Simont's head like a dirty foot mat, feels Hazen might be taking things too far. But Hazen keeps his foot right where it is and tells the Major he has two options. Punish Hazen for insubordination and let Gizar slaughter every last one of them, or overlook the insubordination and use Riifa to survive. Major Simont, shaking like a bowl of hot custard and practically about to wet himself, immediately chooses the second option and begs Hazen to protect the fortress. This makes Hazen laugh as he is enjoying every bit of the absolute humiliation he is dishing out to the cow. But at that moment, Lorenzo can't take it anymore. He finally steps in, punches Hazen to knock some sense back into him, and sends Simont scrambling out of the room like a terrified rodent, still screaming about revenge. Later that day at the infirmary, Lorenzo apologizes to Hazen for punching him, but Hazen actually thanks him for bringing him back to his senses. While healing Riifa, Hazen opens up about why he lost his cool earlier. He tells Lorenzo that a long time ago, someone he cared about risked their life and even their soul to save someone he loved. But despite everything that person did, Hazen called them a monster because they used a forbidden act to save that life. Hazen admits that even though that person acted out of love, he was the one who brought them down because their power scared him. He thought there was no other choice. Hazen says he can make excuses forever, but he'll never forgive himself for calling someone who tried to save others a monster. He admits that just hearing Sismont and the soldiers call Riifa a monster dragged all that guilt back up. Lorenzo is touched by Hazen's tragic past, and for the first time sees clearly that behind Hazen's cold exterior, he's still human. So he pats him on the back to comfort him. Just then, there's a knock at the door. When Hazen opens it, he sees the soldiers who hid behind the barricade earlier, the same ones who called Riifa a monster. They've come to apologize for acting like idiots even though Riifa saved them. Seeing how emotionally wrecked they are, Hazen just brushes it off. As their captain, he orders them to eat, rest, and prepare. The soldiers are shocked by how calm he is, but Hazen explains that Riifa will be bedridden for at least a month, so they'll have to man up since no one will be fighting in their place. Hearing this, the soldiers straighten up and say they understand. They need to fight to repay Riifa. Hazen then turns to leave but tells them he still hasn't forgiven them. However, if they survive, they should bring Riifa a meal to show their thanks. Later that night, Hazen quietly checks on Riifa while Lynn sleeps beside her. The following morning, Hazen steps onto the battlefield to face Gizar, who is already hyped and ready. General Gizar immediately proposes a one-on-one duel, and Hazen agrees without hesitation. But then Hazen suggests they make the duel more interesting with a wager. When Gizar asks what it is, Hazen says that if he wins, Gizar must accept becoming his subordinate. Who will win this duel? Hazen or General Gizar? Comment Commoner Officer if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.